This Torah class is brought to you by TorahAnytime.com.
For this Mishmar Shaila, by submitting an answer, you could win a brand new Megillas Esther. So here it goes. Mishmar Shaila for Chodesh Adar. The Gemara tells us in Masechta Megillah, Daf Hey Amud Beis, Bikesh Rebbe Lakar Tisha B'Av. Rebbe wanted to uproot Tisha B'Av. Comes Tosfos, second Tosfos on the Amud, Divrei Hamaschal U Bikesh, and Tosfos in his second question asks as follows: how could the Gemara have entertained that Rebbe wanted to uproot Tisha B'Av? But there's a general principle: Ein bezdin yachal levatel divrei bezdin chaveroi elam kein gedolah mimena b'chacham of a minyan. A later court does not have the authority to uproot the ruling of an earlier court unless it's greater b'chacham of a minyan, in wisdom and in number. And Rebbe, who was much later than those who enacted Tisha B'Av, actually Tisha B'Av was enacted by the Nevi'im. It's mentioned in the Navi Zechariah, Tzoim HaChamishi, Yela Beis Yehuda, L'Sason L'Simcha. So how could Rebbe, who was a Tana, much later than those who originally enacted Tisha B'Av, how could Rebbe have uprooted Tisha B'Av? What does the Gemara mean? Bikesh Rebbe Lakar Tisha B'Av. But Rebbe was not Gadol B'chacham of a minyan. That's Tosfos' question. Answers Tosfos in the second answer. Says Tosfos, Rebbe didn't want to uproot Tisha B'Av completely. To uproot an enactment, a legislation of an earlier court, then we apply the rule in bezdin yachal levatel divrei bezdin chaveroi elam kein gadol mimena b'chacham of minyan. What the Gemara means that Rebbe bikesh lakar Tisha B'Av is that he just wanted to move it from the 9th and establish it on the 10th. Like Rabbi Yochanan said at the end of Tainus, that if he was around when Tisha B'Av was enacted, he would have made it on the 10th, because the majority of the Beis Hamikdash burnt down on the 10th. The Gemara says that they set fire to the Beis Hamikdash at the end of the day of the 9th, and it burnt down the very end of the day of the 9th, and the rest of it burnt down on the 10th. So the majority of the Beis Hamikdash burnt down on the 10th. So says Tosfos, Rebbe didn't want to uproot Tisha B'Av entirely. He just was going to make a little adjustment. He was going to tweak it. He was going to move it from the 9th to the 10th. Moving a legislation is not a violation of Ein bezdin yachal levatel divrei bezdin chavera elam kein gedolah mimena b'chacham minyan. Tosfos seems to apply that to entirely uproot the legislation of the Chachamim, that is a violation of Ein bezdin yachal levatel divrei bezdin chavera. But in this case, it's not a complete akira. It's just tweaking it from the 9th to the 10th, and that is permitted because it's not an akira. That's what Tosfos says. We come to the beginning of Masechta Megillah on Daf Beis Amud Aleph, and the Gemara makes a statement here that would seem to fly in the face of this idea that Tosfos set forth. The Gemara is going on the Mishnah. The Mishnah said there are 5 possible days to read the Megillah: the 11th, the 12th, the 13th, the 14th, and the 15th. We know the Megillah talks about the 14th and the 15th. Regular cities laying it on the 14th. Walled cities laying it on the 15th. But villages who provide food for the big cities, we allow them to come in early and lay in the Megillah on an earlier 13th, if the 13th is a Monday or a Thursday, or even on the 12th, or even on the 11th. Ask the Gemara, who legislated that the villagers could lay in it on the 11th and 12th and the 13th? Says the Gemara, it had to have been Anshe Knesset Agdola. Why? Because if Anshe Knesset Agdola legislated the 14th and the 15th, and later Chachamim came along and they made the 11th, the 12th, and the 13th, how would they later, Rabbanon, be able to do such a thing? But ein bezdin yachal levatel divrei bezdin chaveroi elam kein gadol mimena b'chacham of a minyan. Says the Gemara, it must be that the Anshe Knesset Hagdolah themselves were the one who enacted the 11th, the 12th, and the 13th. Because if they only made the 14th and the 15th, and later authorities said you could also do 11th, 12th, and 13th, that would violate Ein bezdin yachal levatel divrei bezdin chavera elam kein gadol mimena b'chacham of a minyan. The question is that the Achronim ask. Look in the Mayim Chayim in his notes on Tosfos on Hey Amud Beis. Another Achronim ask as well. That why does the Gemara have to say that the Anshe Knesset Agdolah themselves enacted 11, 12, and 13? Why couldn't it be that the Anshe Knesset Agdolah only enacted the 14th and the 15th? And the later Chachamim allowed the 11th and 12th and 13th. Ein bezdin yachal levatel divrei bezdin chaveroi elam kein gadol mimena b'chacham minyan. Tosfos says it's mavur on Hayom and Beis, that if they're not uprooting it completely, they're just tweaking the calendar date, they're just moving it over, that's permitted for them to do. That's not considered nakira. It's only a tweak. So the kasha is, based on what Tosfos says, is clear on the Gemara on Hayom and Beis, that moving a date that was established by earlier authorities to a different date, that Tosfos says later authorities are allowed to move the date, then why does the Gemara in Beis Amud Aleph have to say that the early authorities also made the 11th, 12th, and 13th? Why? Maybe really Anshe Knesset only made the 14th and the 15th. And the later Chachamim came along and they said you could also do 11, 12. How could they do that? But they're not greater b'chachma minyan? They don't have to be. They're not being oiker. They're just tweaking the calendar date. This is the Mishmar Shaila Chodesh Adar. Wishing everyone bracha v'hatzlacha. This year is sponsored as a zechus for all those looking to find their zivug hagun. They should find their zivug bekarov mamash. Now, the Megillas Esther Raffle is also sponsored by Safe Telecom, the premier kosher smartphone. Stay smart, stay safe, and get a free case by entering promo code MISHMAR in capital letters at the checkout. Please submit your answers to the Mishmar Shaila to 646-598-4703. 646-598-4703. Win one free entry for a Megillas Esther. Afreilichen Adar Aleph. Bracha v'hatzlacha.
You've just experienced another Torah class brought to you by TorahAnytime.com.